we're good to go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Hale, the Executive Director, and now I'm calling the meeting of the Bus Transit Coordinating Committee to order at 2:32. Will you please run the video, Terry-Ann?
Yes, sorry, I did not have that ready. It's uploading now, sorry.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain meeting will be conducted as a Zoom.
Okay, there we go. Let me know if you can see this. Sorry, my computer is it's not functioning well.
Yep, I just saw your screen.
Okay, but not the video, right?
No.
Saw the very beginning of the video, but now it's gone.
Yeah, now it's gone.
Yeah, it's not an option on my computer to run it. Let's see. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to run it. Let me see if you can hear it when I try to share it.
We can hear that. We heard the audio.
You can hear it? Okay, I'll just do that then.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should mute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Thank you, Terry-Ann. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. So do we have any public comment or received any public comment, Terry-Ann?
We do not have any public comment.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to provide public comment? Please raise your hand. All right, seeing no hands raised.
Hands raised.
That closes the public comment period. We can move on to the next agenda item, which is the consent calendar. Seeing none, we'll move on to the regular agenda items. So item 4A, the review of the guidelines of the appointment of the ex officio bus transit representative to the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So I'll hand it over to Peter for this item.
Yeah, let's see, am I on mute here? No.
You
Okay.
wanna call roll call first?
Oh yeah, you're right. I forgot roll call. Darn it. Will you take the roll, please, Terry-Ann?
Yes, thank you. Charlie Anderson.
Here.
Member Churchill.
Here.
Okay, Member Hirsch.
Chris Sandrichak sitting in for Member Hirsch.
Thank you. Andrzejczyk, is that how you say it?
Yeah, good enough.
Practicing for the next Member Krieg,
Here.
Representative Nobty, I hope I'm saying that right.
Here. Yeah, that's correct.
And then our representatives from the WETA are absent this evening. And then also want to note we have several of the alternates also present. We have Member Thompson, Member Horta,
Present.
and Member Ponte.
Here.
Hunt.
And then we also have our representative from the Authority Board, Representative Powers.
Here.
We have everyone present except for the representative from the WETA.
Thank you, Terry Ann. So Peter, you want to convene or start item 4A, please?
Yeah, I wanted to add this since this is the first time we're kind of officially meeting as a Brown Act. And we have these guidelines that we've always used as the BTCC to kind of get us through. We're not really proposing from a staff perspective any changes to these guidelines, other than for the purposes of the BTCC that to kind of oversee these meetings, have a chair that comes from the BTCC, and that chair would be staff of the transit representative that is currently sitting as the bus transit representative on the board. Wow, that came out really confusing. So in other words, maybe I can simplify this. Since Maureen Powers is the representative on the board, she represents WestCat, that WestCat would chair these BTCC meetings until Maureen's position rotates to AC Transit, which is next, and then either Michael or Chris would chair the BTCC meeting. So I just was, I think Timmy kind of mentioned this to all of you in advance, but we just wanted to make sure that we're all kind of in agreement on that process and that everybody felt comfortable with that, and that we would go ahead and add those to these guidelines moving forward.
Peter, can I jump in? Do you need a nomination for this to be official?
I don't think we do, Tim. Do you have any?
I think per Brown Act, we need a nomination for chair.
Okay.
Well, okay, well then I nominate Charlie Anderson.
I will second that.
Okay, and in my absence, assuming I may have to miss a meeting or two during the cycle, is our alternate representative then in view with the power of the chair?
That was our vision. And then similarly, if you want to make a nomination for vice chair, our vision would be that the next, because we do have a rotating cycle for the board representative. It goes currently WestCat, then AC Transit, and then I believe it's alphabetical order. So then that would be 3 CTA and then Tri-Delta. So then the AC Transit would be the vice chair under that if you wanted to amend your or revise your
Nomination.
Amend your motion. Thank you.
Okay, I will amend it to include the vice chair. I mean, then Hirsch, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That would be my amendment.
And I'll second the amended motion. Or whatever the proper words are.
Fill in the blanks.
So Peter, we have a motion for Charlie Anderson to be the chair and Michael Hirsch to be the vice chair of the BTCC. All in favor?
I think she has to take roll.
Roll call vote.
Well, yeah, but we have, yeah, so do you want to take roll call on that?
Yeah. Okay, Member Anderson,
Yes.
Member Churchill,
Yes.
Member Andrzejczyk,
Yes.
Member Krieg.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, Charlie, it's all yours to go to the next agenda item.
Okay, well, I should have printed out my agenda in anticipation.
So it's review and recommend funding for the Contra Costa Integrated Transit Plan.
Okay, well, let's move to that item. And who's give me the staff report.
Peter will give us that.
Yeah, I'll start it and then I'll turn it over to Tim if there's anything to add. So we sent to you Friday, and I apologize for all the lateness on this. We're trying to get this first BTCC meeting. We wanted to get it going, anticipating going to the authority at our January board meeting for approval to release the request for qualifications. We have since decided to push that to February and give us all a little bit more time to kind of put the final language together for the board. But if you all got a chance to review that request for qualifications, we would certainly love to get your feedback on that, whether you want to do that in writing or talk about it here and now, or just have a general discussion here and now about the ITP and what we ultimately want to look for as far as a consultant's concerned. So that's the first thing. The other thing is funding for the ITP. We received a $500,000 grant, I guess we'll call it, from MTC of some federal funds to be matched dollar for dollar from local funds to help support this. We think we're going to need a little bit more than that. We do have a FTA grant application out for persistent poverty communities that would help support the ITP. We don't know yet if we're going to receive that, but we are proposing to use Measure J funds that come out of both the Program 14, which is the bus transit program, and the express bus program. And these funds are what would be reconciliation funds from fiscal year 2021. During COVID, we reduced our projection for Measure J funding quite significantly into the beginning of the year, and then we increased it mid-year and paid based on that. The funds came in even higher than anticipated, and so what we would like to do is use a portion of those funds to help support the ITP program itself. So we're generally talking about looking at a maximum of $1 million of those Measure J funds. Through our projections, that would leave some money still on the table to disperse. To you folks, it was about $1.5 million coming to the program's side of the house for that additional revenue that came in. So if we took $1 million off the top of that, it would still leave roughly $500,000 to disperse. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. I've had a cold all weekend. To all of you for reconciliation of that year. Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think I'll just add, in terms of the integrated transit plan, I think we've had several meetings on the integrated transit plan, and I think we all recognize, the importance of doing the integrated transit plan, and especially in light of the Blue Ribbon Task Force and the 27 recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And I know all of you are already coordinating and already talking about, next steps relative to that from a regional perspective, but we really want to talk about how it will directly impact Contra Costa County and really take a proactive approach to addressing those things, the Blue Ribbon Task Force recommendations, through the integrated transit plan here in Contra Costa County, and obviously in conjunction and in concert with some of the other regional activities that are going on in terms of, fare integration, et cetera. So it's really an effort to really show how we can really make transit better in Contra Costa County, and as well as, really coordinate it with the future of some of the other things that we would like to see in Contra Costa County relative to first and last mile and shared mobility hubs and zero emissions and equity, as well as maybe address some policy and institutional issues if we need to as part of the integrated transit plan. So I really appreciate all of your support up to this point, and looking forward to your feedback.
Okay, so I think it would be useful to actually have time for some questions and answers on this and some discussion. So why don't I open it up for that?
And if you have a question, you can either raise your physical hand or raise your hand in Zoom.
Okay, so I see
Bill.
Bill Churchill first.
Well, one thing I was kind of curious about. So there's more revenue in Measure J than anticipated. And of the portion that would come to transit, which you're estimating to be about 1.5 million, you want to reallocate 1 million to this study. And then the 500,000 remaining, is that distributed across everybody, or is that to a subgroup of
No.
the operators? How does that work?
Yeah, Bill. So there's a formula specifically in the expenditure plan. There's percentages designated under these two programs for all of the operators. In the case of the program 14, which is the bus program, it's by operator. In the case of Express Bus, it's by subregion. So the funds would be dispersed. The remaining funds would still be dispersed by way of that same percentage formula. And I can share with you the amounts if you're interested in those specific amounts. And we'd be happy to do that. I don't have it completely broken down by program, but I have it broken down by combined. So I'll just provide that to you. The combined program 14 bus services and 16 express bus, it would be reducing in the case of AC Transit. Let me make sure I get these numbers right. It would be 441, just over 441,000 would be contributed. And actually this isn't completely right. This actually, I apologize, I haven't completely done. It's roughly 400, little over 400,000. In the case of County Connection, it's about 450,000. In the case of Tri-Delta, it's about 85,000. And in the case of West Cat, it's about 100,000. So essentially the two programs together, 14 and 16, for all of the operators would add up to a disbursement of 1.39 $1,139,799, and we're just proposing to use $1 million of that, so there would be $139,799 to disperse. Plus, we would be dispersing the full reconciliation amount in the subregional programs. So in program 19, which is the West County program, and in program it's 19C in West County and it's 19A in Central County. East County doesn't have a subregional bus services program. So we aren't proposing to touch that. We're proposing to disperse that in its full amount.
Thanks, Peter. It just helps me to understand.
Yeah.
Somewhat new to me, so thank you.
So and I think I don't know how each of your CFOs kind of budgeted these funds, but I think typically they budgeted based on what we presented as the projected amount. So these are kind of like unanticipated funds, at least at the level that the revenues came back at. So it wasn't something that you put into your budget that you would, were counting on necessarily to provide service in that fiscal year or the upcoming fiscal year.
Hey, Peter, this is Chris Hendrichek. You kind of answered my question, is where does this fit in relative to the regular, sort of planned program amount. So thanks.
Okay.
And Jumana, did I see your hand earlier?
Yeah, so I'm a bit new to this committee and I haven't been involved in the previous discussions on the ITP. Is there any kind of back information or draft scope or anything I could take a look at?
Yeah, I can send that to you, Jumana.
Perfect, thank you.
And Peter, could I ask for clarification on when and what action the authority board is going to take on this issue?
Yeah, so we were looking at February, and what we would do is just propose that $1 million of this Measure J fund, as we've described, be used to help complete that study, along with the 500,000 from MTC. And then at the same time, we would also get their approval to release the request for qualifications to find a consultant.
Okay. Okay, so and this does not have any commentary on the draft scope at this point, and it's not an action that the board would be taking to approve the scope as proposed or as written. Not today, no. But in February.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we'll generally take a fairly non-detailed scope to our board to try and avoid, procurement. We don't want to release a full scope prior to, it being fully ready to go and released through our bid system. But generally what we take is a, direction and fairly high level scope and the parameters and costs associated with that to our board for approval.
Okay.
But Charlie, we definitely want to make sure we get, input from the operators, before we kind of give that scope, before we take draft off the scope, so to speak. And I know that, this is something that we've been kind of discussing offline with the operators for the last, since the end of last calendar year. So sending lists and kind of getting the ball started and getting some feedback. So I think our main goal, and what you will see when you get a chance to read it, is really trying to address the Blue Ribbon Task Force kind of action plan and the items that are on that action plan, and to make sure that from a regional perspective that our ITP has kind of addressed their concerns, and at least we've started the planning work and this, the work that needs to be done for our county to help the region meet what it's looking at for its goals. And, also considering the work that's continuing to go on at the regional level with the integration, with the fair integration plan and some of the other things they're doing.
So I always hate this as staff when there's questions that I didn't have a chance to address before a meeting, but I'm going to violate that practice and actually ask something because I think it may be relevant to this discussion. So I was reading through the scope, and there are actually the 3 separate tasks, and they're all quite distinct one from another. And I think the 3rd task may depend on additional funding being approved somewhere else that's not identified yet, not secured yet. So in reading it, I had the concern that some of the most critical first functions of a study are in the latter phases of the study. And then the other thing that occurred to me in reading it was that there is a lot of investment from the region in, kind of looking at fair coordinate integration, let's say.
Right.
And that's a portion that is given to the consultants here as well. So, I mean, I'm only raising it because it has budgetary implications for how much this study costs and how much it may be duplicative of other things going on. Or it may be appropriate to actually have another look at the scope to just see, given that we're still in the pandemic and we'll be coming out of the pandemic in a way that affects transit, that some of those questions that are in the latter phases might be advanced and done more, in a more timely way. So I don't know if others have had a chance to read through the scope and form opinions about it, but I mean, I'm just sharing my own.
Yeah, that's that's certainly the kind of feedback we're looking for, Charlie. And we certainly don't want to have something in that third phase that should really be in the first phase. And likewise, if there's something that's in the first phase that, you know, could potentially get bumped, or at least have the consultant recognize that this is a concurrent project being done regionally, and whatever's done regionally needs to be considered and incorporated into the ITP, but not necessarily have a lot of, you know, work put into that. And I think that's the direction I was going, and maybe it wasn't very clear at this point with regard to the integrated fare study and task force that's working on that. But would certainly be interested in hearing, you know, what you think are those kind of critical things in the second or third phase that should be, you know, considered more in the first part, because we definitely want to capture the most important stuff in the main part of the study that we know we have funding to complete.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons that I was asking about the timeline for authority board taking action and releasing something to the consultants, so that there is ample time to kind of go through the scope in more detail. And, you know, I apologize for not being more invested in this before, but I think when I read through, there were definitely some things that I wanted to engage in a conversation with you about.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is the time to do some of that, or if you prefer to have that at a later, you know, staff meeting.
Tim, do you have any thoughts on timeline?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I think the item before you is really to approve the funding plan and release the RFP, the authorization to release the RFP for the integrated transit plan. I think relative to the scope of work, I think those are the details that we can work out, you know, between now and when, even when the board, you know, approves the integrated transit plan, the scope of work, as long as the integrity stays intact in terms of the purpose of the RFQ relative to the integrated transit plan, we can continue working on the scope of work before we actually release the RFP to the public. So I think there could be definitely some more work and collaboration done on the scope of work, but I think the action in front of the committee is really the approval of the funding plan and then releasing the RFP. You know, so if we all generally agree, or if you agree to release an RFP for an integrated transit plan, then you can vote on that today, and then that'll go to the authority board, and then for their consideration. And then as those conversations and those approvals are happening, we can certainly make tweaks to the scope of work, as long as the general intent of the action, meaning release the RFQ for integrated transit plan, stays intact. That would be my overall suggestion in terms of an approach.
Okay, so other thoughts from the committee?
Charlie, this is Chris. I haven't gotten a chance to read through the scope yet. Sorry, Peter, but I will be probably actually like Rob or someone else would be better off looking at this at our agency, but we'll definitely get back to you on it. I guess I would move on to, I move to approve the funding plan and allow staff to move forward with this to their commission. I think that's the right action we're looking for.
Yeah,
I would say, yeah, it would be approve the funding plan and the authorization to release an RFP for the integrated transit plan.
Okay, I move what Tim just said. And yeah, and I don't want to cut off any discussion, certainly if anybody has any questions, but I thought I'd start with that.
Yeah, before we move on, may I ask a question, Charlie? Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on it. So we're gonna spend 500,000 from MTC, the $1 million from Measure J, for a $1.5 million study for phase 1, right? There's multiple phases in this.
Well, the reason we're looking at phases is because we don't know what's going to happen with that federal grant yet. So the idea was that we would get a consultant on board. We would get proposals based on the two phases, but one or two of the phases may not happen based on funding. So we want to capture as much of the core program in that first phase as possible. So to Charlie's point, anything that might be in those latter two phases that really needs to be addressed in order to, like Tim said, be proactive in our approach to the region, we need to make sure we capture those. So I hope that answered your question, Bill.
I think it did. Go ahead.
So I think the phases are up for discussion.
Yes.
And I think that was our attempt to kind of hone in on, what we can do with the $1.5 million. The way that I saw this happening is that we were hopefully going to be able to do, the way it's currently written right now is you have three phases. So phase one is really the kind of the optimization of the existing network. Phase two is the zero emission, and then phase three is the equity piece. And so the idea was that the $1.5 million funding plan would fund, phase one and phase two, and then phase three would be funded by the equity grant that we hopefully will be successful with FTA. So I think what we can do is the phases are up for discussion, and we can work with the BTCC to modify the scope to fit within that $1.5 million. And if we only end up with phase one and phase two, I think the other reason for the phasing too was we weren't exactly sure how much funding the BTCC would approve. And so if after the BTCC considers and moves and approves this additional $1 million, I think we'll have a better sense of how we can fit the scope within the two boxes between the grant and the 1.5 million.
And I think the terminology using the terminology phasing was probably inappropriate here, and it's confusing because it seems to imply a sequence. And
yeah, it should be more like a task. It's like task one, task two, and three. It
should be the main thing, the main ITP, and then it should be, option A, please for this additional work A, additional work B. B may be more important from the perspective of than A, for instance. It just seemed like those two sections, one being more the zero emission thing, and then the deeper dive into the equity part through the persistent poverty communities, were easily separate tasks that could be added to kind of the main ITP project, depending on funding. So sorry for that confusion.
No, it's probably me. I'm relatively new to it, so forgive me for all my questions, and I just want to make sure I understand it well and know what I'm doing. I guess one of the other questions that pops out to me that just seems natural, as you applied for the FTA funds, one would assume there's a match, and does that make it, if we approve money here that's local, does that help you with your FTA component of it as well?
Yes, we would use whatever Measure J money as, matching funds, because it is part of a larger project for the ITP project.
Okay. And then, that helps me. And I guess as I read through the scope, so much of it's connected that I don't know how you do some of it without the other. And so I guess in a way it makes it more comfortable for me to know it's really for more of the whole. And the fact, and Tim, you said that we're still working on scoping, so maybe that we can kind of work through some of those nuances to make sure that it fits in a way that makes sense and is cohesive. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for the clarity.
Yeah.
Jeannie?
Yeah. Some of my questions have been answered. I want to go back. I know we have a motion on the floor, and I want to go back to clarify that would include the BTCC working on the revising the draft scope of work. I'd also like to hear a little bit about the time frame for this. I mean, if you take it to the authority board this month, I mean, when do you plan to publish it? So how much time do we have to work on this scope, and what's the process? What are the mechanics of getting our comments incorporated and approved by the rest of the committee and so on.
I guess that's up to your schedules. We definitely want to make sure that we are able to get, clear input from you on how at what level the scope is at before it is published. We struggle a lot internally with, putting together a scope because we don't want to necessarily over direct the creativity of a consultant to be able to put some of this, transformational type ideas out there. So we wanted to give them some leeway in in the approach that they take in preparing the study and how they move it forward. But we definitely don't want to miss direct, deliverables and tasks that we really need to be done to be part of, how we move this forward back to the region, or, propose back to the region as they're doing their work. We also want to not be too far behind the ball of the schedule that's been proposed by MTC for the action plan that they have. I just realized today there was 27 action items and there's 27 transit operators. I wonder if that was a coincidence. But so the schedule is somewhat flexible. I think Jeannie, Tim and I were talking about it earlier, that we're not necessarily on a timeline, but we certainly don't want to sit on this. We want to, like I said, be proactive and keep moving it forward. And so I would encourage that we get together, get your comments. When's our next BTCC meeting, Terry Ann? It's January, February, March. I think it's April.
Yeah, it's on April 11th.
And we would be looking at April. That would also be the meeting where you approve the fund allocations for Measure J for next fiscal year. But I don't know, Tim, I mean, if we get board approval to release the scope, we could potentially just have that scope finalized at that BTCC meeting in April and then release it.
Yeah, it just depends on, I think, Peter, I feel like you hit a nail on the head. I think we want to make sure that the work we're doing is done in parallel with the more regional work. And so we don't want to get too far behind. I think that's the important aspect here. And so I think ideally, I mean, my preference would be to try to take something to the board in February, if we can, at the latest March. And that allows all of you some time, to review the scope of work and provide some feedback. And then we can take it to the authority board.
Well, I think based on what you said, if we get their approval to finalize the scope of work and working with the operators, and if they give us approval to do that, we can just, if staff is comfortable with, it's still within the scope of what the board approved, then as soon as we get that done, we can just release it then. We don't have to go back to the board again.
Yep. And I think that's what Jeannie's original point was, is modifying the motion to include that.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with the concept that there's more work to do than $1.5 million will buy, so that things can kind of come in and out as there's funding available to augment the scope. I think I'll just share my thoughts on the scope generally, which is that what's proposed up front acknowledges that there's a regional effort that we have to kind of react to and, protect what's valuable about the system in Contra Costa County. But I think some of the other things that are in there talking about, performance measures that are based on productivity, let's say, for example, leaves out this big question about what do we do now with the realization that people who are on our system now are people who really need to be on the system right now, that equity question.
Yeah.
That's left out of the evaluation. That's a big problem, it seems to me. What system are we building back? I mean, the first, the description in the first section was more, people are getting out of the county to go to workplaces. We have to build, means of a coordinated system so they can do that. And so we'll devote time on that, and we'll put effort into evaluating those and performance measures that are the classic ones. And I don't know what's going to happen with workplaces and with remote work and those types of things, which are critical questions for operators in this county and in the region. So I think, it's a look at where the focus is. I think some of the other things that are necessary to make a successful system are dealing with those travel time competitiveness issues and making strategic investments, which is, why this is so appropriate to be done with CCTA, because there are other infrastructure monies that you have and other improvements and roads and other, kind of infrastructure investments that tie into this work to say, what do we need to build for the next 40 years? So I think, kind of having that discussion, it's not just, all of us sitting back, I think, and writing comments about the scope. I think it's putting our heads together to say, what does transit service look like post-pandemic over the next, several decades? And let's plan for that. So, that's why I want to have a little bit more some time and a little bit more robust discussion about what to direct the consultants to do.
I thought that was really good comments, Charlie. And I think I think in kind of similar to Bill's comments, I think input and feedback from you is going to be really important to make this successful. And so I think getting that scope of work really dialed in a way that you feel like is really going to address the problem, I think is really, really important.
Okay, so I think, acknowledging that there's a little bit of time urgency on this, I think we need to kind of commit to doing something quickly and making staff resources available to actually have the meeting or have the process to go through this so that it can get out to the consultant community. So, okay, Bill, did I see your hand?
You did, Charlie. I was just going to say you hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree more. Oftentimes, performance metrics are in direct contradiction with equity. We need to be really thoughtful moving forward, in particular because of COVID. I think the recovery time is going to be significantly greater than we all thought. So we really need to be thoughtful about this and how we put it together, or it won't be successful for us. So it's just really more or less echoing your thoughts on that. I couldn't agree more.
Any other comments? So I guess Chris's motion is still lacking a second formally, unless I missed one.
I would say it needs to be modified one more time based on Jeannie's comment. So I think the motion would be to approve the funding plan and the $1 million allocation for Measure J, approve the authorization release an RFP for the integrated transit plan, and then also direct staff to work with the BTCC to finalize the scope of work.
I'm happy to revise in that way that, we approve the funding plan, release the RFP, approve staff releasing the RFP, and with the caveat that they continue to work with the BTCC on the scope.
I will second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, so Terry Ann, I guess time for a roll call.
And it looks like we have no written public comments or any public with this as well, so no public comment. And then I'll go ahead and call the roll. Member Churchill?
If I can unmute, yes.
Thank you. Member Krieg?
Yes.
Member Andrzejczyk?
Yes.
Chair Anderson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, I did print out an agenda, so that's the major action item. I guess the next is correspondence and communication. That remains.
I think this is an opportunity when we were putting this together that this would be a chance for any of you to provide comments or maybe future agenda items or things we want to discuss at future BTCC meetings. We have committed to quarterly official BTCC meetings. So like I said, next month will be where we look at the funding allocations for all of you through Measure J, and have you approve that so we can get that to the board in June. But maybe there's other topics that you feel we should address at future meetings. I don't know if you want to have a standing discussion about any of the stuff that's going on with respect to the regional efforts, whether it be the network manager or any of that stuff. I know there's lots of forums that you're already having those discussions in.
Well, Peter, I think that it is topical. I think it is something we should discuss together as a group, support group or otherwise. So I would support having that on the agenda, future standing item.
Maybe we can just phrase it as the Blue Ribbon Task Force action plan, and then whatever if it's related to one of those 27 items, it can come up for discussion.
Further comments? Okay, hearing none. I believe we're moving to adjournment. And the next meeting is scheduled for April 11th. Okay.
All right.
We're adjourned. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thanks.